All right. Well, welcome everyone again. My name is Maya Lampinen, and we're just here to help facilitate a conversation on apprenticeship utilization. Anna and Dawn, do you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves as well? Anna first.
I'm Anna Vogel, procurement manager at the City of Vancouver.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dawn Egbert, and I am the Director of Procurement and Administrative Services at the Port of Vancouver.
So we're hosting this, WANIGP is hosting this kind of to facilitate conversation regarding how are you implementing your apprenticeship utilization requirements, everything. I'm assuming I've seen a lot of questions on what is the incentive, what is your disincentive, what is your policy around good faith efforts, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if we want to just try and gather some of the questions that folks have and then have people start to share, or if we want to be more systematic about it and start going through like good faith efforts, adjustment to the requirements, the monetary incentive and penalty, and the amounts, and then kind of any other questions folks have. What's your priority, I guess, is my question. Is it the incentive amounts and disincentive? Is that what everyone's mainly interested in?
Are you looking for chat or do you want audio?
Yeah. Chat, audio, I think would be best because we're going to have a number of people who cannot attend, and so they'll be listening to this as it's recorded.
Okay. So my name is Shelley Edwards at the City of Shoreline, and we're looking to use the APWA GSP. Of course, there's some grammar and spelling and cleanup to be done with that, but even looking at that one, I'm still hoping to get more information on like the good faith effort. Like, do you have like a form you're using, a standard so that it's similar from one project manager to the other? Because it still seems very subjective. And I would like to have something more qualitative or actually quantitative for measuring GFE. So I think that's my primary. And then what are the levels of incentive and penalty that everyone's utilizing?
All right, thanks. Anyone else?
I'll just butt in. I'm Debbie with the City of Arlington, Contracts and Procurements Analyst. I did reach out to our city attorney on what he thought we should change, how we should change our contract, and I can share what he sent me. I still haven't done anything with our contracts yet, but I'm just interested in what everybody else is doing, so I can try to get some ideas and brainstorm. But I will share what our city attorney suggested we do with our contract, if that's useful or helpful to anybody. So do that.
Yeah, I suspect there will be.
Yeah, and thank you for doing this. I think that it's kind of a gray area for everybody.
Any new legislation is, especially for some of us who had voluntary programs before, and understanding how to morph a voluntary program into a mandatory program and what can stay the same and what needs to change. So, yeah. Any other questions or things that we need to address as we kind of work our way through this?
Hi, I'm Julie Anderson. I'm at Franklin PUD on the east side of the state. I'm interested in how you guys are using this, or if anyone has used apprentice utilization for grant funding projects, because I know a lot of the incentives and the penalties aren't applicable to that. So how, if anyone has any experience with that. We are brand new. It's a new requirement for us. And of course, our first project going out is grant funded. So any suggestions would be appreciated.
We can definitely chat about that, Julie. I think we all have those coming down the pike. So any other questions at the moment, or do we want to jump right into the few that we've had? Well, why don't we start with some of the few that we had, and then as we start conversation, I'm assuming other questions will come up. So Shelley's first question was on the good faith effort form. Who has created their good faith effort process and a form that's accompanying that, or what is your process around that at the moment?
So we do have a good faith effort form at the Port of Vancouver. It's very generic and it follows the form guidelines, I guess, that the WSDOT program had from when we did some federal apprenticeship utilization. I think it was back in 2010, 2011 when we started doing that. And so our form is a little old and outdated. It doesn't have a lot of very specific information in it. And so we are updating that. And we're updating it to match just some of the questions that are in the statutory language. We're listing out those items. So the demonstrated lack of availability of apprentices in specific geographic areas, that will be listed as something on the form, and then the contractor and our project managers will work together to determine, you know, how many are in our Southwest Washington area for the type of work within that project. Similarly, we'll just list out the rest of them as well, and we'll ask, you know, what efforts they took to reach out to contractors, and we'll just notate it on the form. The other thing that we'll look at is the monthly apprenticeship report that goes along with the WSDOT and the APWA forms. And so monthly, as they send something in and whether they're showing or not showing apprenticeship utilization, can guide those conversations as to, hey, should we be pulling out these GFE forms to say what's happening on the project, and have our inspectors go out and do some interviews with different contractors that are out there.
And Anna?
Yeah, we also have a form we just created. We've had a program since 2004. So before that, we didn't use a form. They just emailed us all the information. Our form is more, for the current program, is more like a checklist of here's all the reasons you can have a good faith effort, and asking them to check it a box and providing the backup data for if they're saying there weren't any available, where are the emails asking for them and those kind of things.
So I'm wondering, when we talk about some of these forms, I'm wondering if you guys can send me everything. When we talk about these, if you want to know which ones they are, I have the ability through WANIGP site to grab an email for all the people registered and then forward out the sample documents for that. Would that work as we're talking through that, if everyone just takes responsibility to email me what they promise to provide or have examples of, and then I can just send that out to the mass email list. There's only 31 people registered, so it's only going to go out to 31 people. But I can send it through that. Does that seem like the best way to get these documents out in public? Okay,
that works.
Okay,
Certainly do that.
Yeah, so get those samples. I also have a good faith effort form, but similar to Dawn, it's very archaic, meaning it doesn't have all of it. So it just basically says attach everything that you've done to demonstrate that you've made the good faith effort. The good faith effort is more situated in the in my tech specs that are in my project manuals. It says there's no apprenticeship program for this particular thing, whatever it ends up being, the various items that we have listed there.
I will say on the good faith effort area, one thing we've learned is the contractors aren't used to documenting these things or saving the emails or, you know, logging the calls that they make to get the apprentices. So it's really been hand holding a lot. Granted, right now we don't have a form, but even with a form, I don't know that it'll help them remember to do all of those things, and going back to them and saying, okay, we need this now to, you know, you didn't provide, there's a gap, provide the backup data for that gap. So there's a lot of hand holding even with a form to get the information you need.
It's a really good point. Anna, do you guys talk about that in your pre-construction meetings at all, on good faith efforts? Because I haven't really talked too much other than, oh, apprenticeship requirement applies here. And that's how I've left it in the pre-con. And I'm wondering how much deeper I need to get with that.
We remind them to document early. but I think it needs to be an ongoing conversation and those regular check-ins of, we're noticing you're not having apprentices. Are you working on it? Where are you at? Are you documenting your efforts? Because if we're not reminding them constantly, it's not something that's in the forefront of their minds when they're working on a big project.
A really good point. Anna, Dawn mentioned that she has the WASH.form form that's sent in, I think, is it monthly, Dawn, that
Yes.
shows the apprentices.
Mhm.
What are you doing for that? Are you doing a monthly check as well? Or, and is it a document that you require from the contractor, or do you use the LNI awarding agency portal?
We're using the LNI awarding agency portal. It's not an accurate check of where they're at because it's based on what payrolls have been submitted to date, but it gives you an idea of where they're at. So yeah, we've been using that as our starting point.
Great. Does anyone else online use a good faith effort form at this point, or is this still something you're working on adding to your?
Hey guys, we're in the process of putting one of our first contracts out, and so we're trying to get a better understanding as to how everybody's putting their projects together and the line items that you're using in the contract bid docs and how those are put together. But we are in the preliminary stages of putting our program together, so appreciate any input.
Awesome. And where are you with, Robert?
We're with Benton County.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yep. I think I was emailing with one of your team members earlier. So
Probably
yeah.
Danica. She's sitting beside me off camera.
Awesome.
So.
Hi, Danica. Being shy. No, that's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of people in your same boat. We were only a year and 18 months to a year or 2 years into our voluntary apprenticeship program. So similarly now trying to figure out how to make that model work with the new requirements. We had a lot of flexibility. I think Anna, I patterned mine after your previous one as well, where I had a lot lower thresholds and I had a lot more flexibility to waive. So it was really more of an incentive, or just to try and really incentivize folks to use apprenticeships. But now that we're required, it changes. Everything's a lot more compliance oriented. So yeah. So we do put in our project manual, a section. I have it labeled, I use CSI. So I'm not using WASH.. I believe that someone just mentioned that WASH.GSPs and then APWAs, but on if you're using CSI, I believe it was 009000, unless I just made that up, which trust me, happens a lot. But I put in there what the good faith would be, and I put several items, and then I also have the little caveat, anything else that may be deemed reasonable by the executive director. But I do not have that on my form at the moment, which I think would be much more helpful. So going back to Shelley's point, or actually who was talking about grants? Oh, Julie, I do put in there conflicting federal or state grant requirements, that if the grant it does not allow for apprenticeship, that we have an automatic waiver of it. Actually, we adjust the requirement before we even go out to bid.
We do the same.
Yeah, thank you. We incorporated one. I just wasn't sure if that was enough to just have a statement. But if you guys are doing it, then it sounds like I'm on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
We recently had a grant where it stipulated a 25% apprenticeship utilization. And so we're doing 25% for that project. But I think kind of to that point, it's whatever the grant documents say, we ensure that we have the project team is aware of what they're asking for before we say, yeah, let's go after this grant to pay for this project that's going to cost us more money to administer now. Mm-hmm. And so typically we are, if the grant says there's no apprenticeship utilization or you can't do an incentive, we'll follow what the grant says and we'll write that into the project. And our commission has bought off on that basically.
Yeah, this one was kind of weird because it was a Washington State broadband office that we already started the grant and we've already been buying material for like 6 months. And then we got an email saying that starting July 1st, we now need to incorporate apprenticeship utilization. So it's not in the original grant documents at all. Or in any
Yeah.
of their example for construction or labor, it was more like a, hey, we didn't know this was a thing. Now you need to follow it. Email from our
So,
contact. Yeah.
so do you have future contracts to let from that grant, or have you already let all the contracts?
No, we have one left, and that was the labor one that's affected
Okay.
by the new
Yeah.
legislation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that is an unfortunate impact from this is
Mhm.
if you had signed the contract before January or July 1, I
Mhm.
don't know that they could have required you to include those in, but if it's signed after July 1, I did have to go back and amend one of the contracts that was out on the street in order to include the apprenticeship requirements. So,
Mhm.
because we awarded it in July. Yeah. So if it's a Washington state grant, most likely you can use your own process. The federal grants are where sometimes those changes come in. Yeah, so the good faith effort, I think, will be really important for us to all have in our documentation because when we just actually were at a port, Dawn and I were just in a port procurement work group at not from 9 to 10, and that was one of the discussions that we were having was we don't want to penalize contractors. We want to make sure that they understand that we're here to work with them and that the good faith effort is just that. There are going to be times when they cannot meet it. And so what does that look like? Is it, if they could demonstrate apprenticeship retention issues, if there's an apprentice to journey person ratio requirement that is going to have problems, or you're adding or deleting work that affect the apprenticeship participation, having some flexibility in your contract to be able to work with your contractor and give them the good faith effort when it makes sense will be important to have in there. Anything else on good faith effort or forms? All right, I think we're to the hot topic of incentives and disincentives. So I don't know who all, maybe by show of hands, either on your screen or in person, but who has already settled on their apprenticeship, yeah, ratios? 2, 3? Is that what I'm seeing? 3 of us? All right. Well, I guess we're the 3 to chat about what we've seen. I guess everyone else is here to learn. So, Dawn, do you want to give us start on what you guys are doing at the Port of Vancouver?
Sure. So the way that we're looking at it is we had a voluntary program we implemented back in 2021, May 2021, and we had an incentive in that program that was $25 an hour for every for a certain percentage met up to 15% cap. So we've basically taken that and revised it, and our current plan is to do anywhere from $2 to $5 million contracts. We'll have a flat rate of $5,000 as the incentive and the disincentive. From 5 to 10 million, we've got a $10,000 flat rate. 10 to 15, it's 15,000, and 15 million and over will be a $20,000 incentive or disincentive. And that's the current plan. We potentially will adjust that as we go if we start to see that it's maybe not the best way to look at things. But Maya did this lovely spreadsheet and had gone back through years of projects, and we did the same thing. So we took all of our projects from the WVFA program where we anything over 2 million, we looked at different percentages, different flat rates, and what that would have cost us in the budget. I provided that to our finance team and our commissioners and CEO, and they all agreed that the flat rate was where they wanted to start. And then potentially we will move to a percentage based if that's necessary in the future. The one thing that I will say is after seeing Anna's plan at the City of Vancouver, our commission did question us on, hey, do we have enough of a disincentive here? And so, I kind of stood strong on the fact that, hey, this is the first time we're doing this in disincentive. I've done research on this for years to find that anytime there is a disincentive, it really kind of chases contractors away from your projects, and they don't want to bid. And they talk about this, contractors talk about, well, I don't want to bid on these projects that have all of these requirements. Really what they're looking at though, I've never seen our bidders numbers go down until it was a negative, right? And so the disincentive is where we might see a reduction in workforce bidding our jobs. And that's the one thing that I'm a little nervous about, adding these disincentives. And so my hope is that by having a flat fee on both sides, that it seems equitable and fair, that, hey, you win out or you lose out, but based on the fact that it's a flat rate. So we'll see how we go there. And then I know that our commission will be watching the city program as well and I will get questions about what they're doing so that we potentially might be going that route as well.
Good segue, Anna.
Yeah, I would say don't follow our example when it comes to penalties. We have a big concern about our penalty program, but maybe I'll start with our incentives. So we did flat rate incentives, like Dawn, from 2 to 5 million, we're $6,000 incentive. For 5 to 10 million, we're 8,000, and then above 10 million, we just did a $10,000 incentive. We did that based on all of our projects. We've had a program since 2004. We looked back at all of our projects and what contractors have been telling us that their programs cost them for each of those kind of dollar ranges and took an average. So it's not perfect science. It probably won't compensate them for their programs, but at least help encourage them to meet the goals. For penalties, we have $100 an hour penalty for each unmet hour for projects over 500,000. So it can be a really large incentive, and we've had this conversation with our city council, or a really large penalty. On some of our projects, we look back at historic data, and originally our proposal to council was a $50 penalty, and they didn't think that was a big enough stick. But at the $100 level, a penalty based on an old project could be up over $100,000. Which seems punitive, which is why we're pushing the good faith effort and working with our contractors regularly to make sure that they're documenting their good faith effort, because I don't want to charge somebody $100,000 at the end of the project and potentially eat up all of their profit. So it's a flat rate fee. We have an interim program for penalties, but it will probably go away for the smaller projects under 2 million. They are doing the $50 per unmet hour penalty, but that will likely go away in 2 years. So for us, our program stays at $500,000 and works its way up. The $500,000 even in 2028 will be at 5%, but we couldn't get rid of the lower dollar threshold program.
So did I miss anyone else who already has their incentive and disincentive set? So the Port of Everett also did some research. We looked at the past 15, like Dawn mentioned, the past 15 projects. I actually have that. Let me quickly share with you what we looked at. We also set up on a flat rate. So this is kind of what we did, was I took the last 15 projects that we had. Dawn and I and Anna actually have had a lot of conversations on what does a meaningful incentive look like. And so there was a report that Dawn had found on gosh, it was from was it Forbes, or I don't remember who put it out, a clearinghouse of some sort, on what is a meaningful incentive and what are states doing nationwide. And there was a lot of thought that maybe 1 to 3% was considered a meaningful. So I started with that. And then, as you can tell, I worked my way down to 0.25%, because all of a sudden we are hurting for money for capital projects. We're in the middle of a lot of new builds and all that. And so I couldn't justify even at 2%, I never even went to 3%, that over 15 projects, we would have paid out $2 million in incentives. And that got people looking, okay, so then I started thinking, well, what does a flat rate look like? And then the amount of projects that we had during that time frame, and then the different time thresholds and various other things, and what would that kind of look like? So what we have settled on is not here, but For an incentive, for the penalty, I'll start with the penalty. We are doing what Anna actually had initially proposed and shared with me, our commission liked. And so we did move forward. Thank you, Anna. I'm sorry you didn't get to move forward with this either. But for the first offense, the first time we work with them, it's $25 an hour. The second time it's 50 and then 75. Again, this is a work in progress. So this may change over the years once we've decided, and actually had to apply it. But then what we've settled on for the time being, what we've settled on for a flat rate is also a sliding scale. So from projects 1 to 5, we're only applying this for 2 million right now. We're following the statutory requirements, but I set the policy up as if it was $1 million right now, so I didn't have to go back. But from projects 1 to 5 is $5,000 incentive. From 5 to 10 is a $10,000 incentive, and projects over 10 million is a $15,000 incentive is what we're currently doing. I know a lot of schools are doing $1,000 incentive is what I've heard. I think Port of Seattle just mentioned that they were doing that as a $1,000 incentive, and I didn't hear if they were doing that as their disincentive as well. Did you hear that, Dawn or Hannah?
I thought they said they were doing a percentage on the disincentive side.
That may be, yes. Sounding familiar. So what are your thoughts on what you've heard so far? Is this kind of where you guys have been thinking? Or are you guys quite a bit lower, a little bit higher? Still
Yes.
taking it in?
I'm going to add, I've paid out in the voluntary program, I think 4 different incentives that range from $9,000 to I think $16,000 based on the percentage that they brought to the project, capped at 15%. So it's not been it's not chump change, but it's also not, it doesn't hurt us. And so I think the flat rate was a little more palatable by our commissioners because it's not a percentage that we don't know until the end of the project. It's
right.
It's set before
You can plan for it.
Yeah.
I think from my project managers was the same thought process that Dawn was just saying. They needed to understand that they could plan on 10 million or $10,000 incentive or $15,000 incentive when they were doing their capital planning as well. So the flat rate for them was preferable.
Us too. Yeah, we had that conversation and were not fond of the percentage approach because they would never be able to budget that appropriately. So the flat rate was definitely more agreeable for them. I will say that in our projects, we've never hit 15%. I mean, maybe 2 projects in 20 some or 15 years that we've hit 15%. So we don't anticipate paying out many incentives unless there's a big boom of apprentices in the Clark County area. But yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a good point, Anna. My assumption in the way I've written my program is if you do a good faith effort and we do approve a good faith effort, the incentive goes away. There is no incentive to meet whatever modified percentage. It's you meet 15%, you get the incentive. Right. You meet 12% and we've agreed on 12%, the incentive goes away, but you don't get penalized.
That's how we're doing ours as well.
So are you all sort of mirroring the incentive to the penalty? Like if it's a $5,000 possible incentive, is it a maximum $5,000 possible penalty? Or are they just exclusive?
I think that's my program.
Ours are exclusive. So the penalty and the incentive don't mirror each other.
Likewise. I believe Port of Seattle just told us that their disincentive is capped at a specific, and I can't remember if it's a percent of the contract or if it's a flat rate, 5,000?
5%.
5%. Okay. So if they really miss the mark and they do a disincentive, they still cap that at 5% of the contract. I really think a lot of us are going to be tweaking this over the next couple years. Just trying to figure out what works for our jurisdictions and the contractors, the apprenticeship programs in our areas, type of work that we're doing. What other questions are out there now that we've had some chats about a few other of the three items? I don't know if we fully covered for Debbie, Julie, or Shelley, the items that you had on your initial questions.
What were my initial questions?
Yours was more on the grant, just grant funding and how we're handling it. So, but yeah, we talked about, I had noted down that we need to talk about good faith effort, levels of incentives and penalties in grant funding. So Dawn, I know this is something, I guess, if no one, does anyone else have any questions? I do have a couple other thoughts of things to chat about.
This is Sarah at the Port of Skagit, and we've been working with our attorney to get our forms updated. And he's just, I don't know if I'm struggling or he's struggling or the two of us are struggling to get together on the grant part of it, because I've told him I would like the ability that if there is a federal grant that doesn't allow it, that we go out to bid and we have that language in there that there will be no utilization apprenticeship requirements because of the grant. And he's just really struggling with that for some reason. He thinks it all has to be done after the fact, that it's like you can't preload it that way. So if you could share potentially your language when you send stuff out, Maya, that would be super helpful for me to give him an example of, you know, hey, this is what another port's doing or another city, or because I just can't seem to make that connection for some reason with him.
That's where I'm interested in too, is what other entities, how you're incorporating that language into your contracts and your policies. Yeah.
I will say at the city, we are waiving the apprenticeship goal if the materials cost is higher than the labor cost. So we'll waive that ahead of time and include that in the solicitation, that there's no apprenticeship goal. Or if the project is less than 30 days, because we know our contractors in our area struggle to get apprentices for less than 30 days, that we waive the goal before we go out to bid, as well as for the grant funding.
That is my plan as well.
Same, and our attorney, I have a written, I guess, I don't know if it's a legal opinion or if it's just a memo on this from our attorney stating the same, and can't share it for the purpose of keeping our client attorney privilege, but I can say that they very much agreed that some of the good faith effort language is specific to one item in that section 2 of the statute, and the rest of it is determined before the bid.
So I think Sarah, L&I is interpreting what Dawn just mentioned the same way your attorney is. We have had disagreements with L&I's interpretation, and therefore both Dawn and I have gone to our legal counsel for that cover, if you will, for when the fact that we will waive it ahead of time, that we do believe that L&I has interpreted in what I have heard in their trainings is you must go out to bid, and then if it's a material versus labor percentage after the fact, then you can waive it from a good faith. I have argued to a lot of folks that I cannot go out to bid in good conscience with what I know will not fly, because it is not competitive. For instance, there are no dredging. I'm a port. There are no apprentice dredgers. If I go out for a $4 million contract on a dredging and put apprenticeship requirements in it, am I even going to get bids? And will they be competitive? Because they're going to have to start planning for, oh, well, how big is my disincentive going to be if they don't waive it for a good faith effort? Because there's a risk there. And so I would prefer to waive that. And so, yes, I also have what Dawn, I don't have it. I don't have my final draft, but I do have what Dawn has also mentioned is got a legal opinion. Sarah, that does not help you when your legal counsel has a different opinion, but, I'm trying to think of how we can help you there.
So one thing that I can mention is that we had this discussion internally with our attorneys, and then MRSC was having the same discussion with MRSC attorneys. MRSC came back and had similar thoughts, had said something about reading it as plain language versus statutory language, and then also, you know, kind of just had some things for consideration. And so rather than sharing my legal opinion from our attorneys, we said, okay, how about you two attorneys start talking to each other?
Mhm.
And so that is something that you could potentially do, is have your attorney reach out to MRSC's attorney and see if they can maybe make light of what you're trying to say, and or shed some light on that side of things for the attorney that you're struggling with.
All right. Yeah. So Sarah put thank you in the chat there. So anything else that I see? Brooke has a few questions as well.
Yes, I don't know if you guys discussed this. I got here a little bit late, but so I apologize if it's redundant. How are you guys getting the payment for any penalties that are being assessed? Are you guys invoicing after the fact, or are you taking it from their retainage? How is that happening?
We're gonna have a line item in our pay estimate that says apprenticeship incentive or disincentive with a, you know, whether it's 5 or 10 or whatever that number is, it'll be that number, and that gets withheld. Kind of like you do withhold retainage if you're going to. And so that's withheld there until the end of the project, and they'll get that paid out at the end once we know that they have met it, or it gets retained by us.
Gotcha. So that actually takes care of my other question that I had about a few of the past trainings that have gone on. Aliana has suggested to have it as a bid item, or a line item. So I guess that takes care of that one, how that works. And then I think one of the trainings had stated about the good faith effort approval, that we aren't the ones to actually approve it or not, and we're just submitting it to L&I. Do they approve it, or is that on our judgment to approve it? Okay.
That's your judgment.
Okay.
You do have to submit that after you've made your judgment to L&I at the end of the project.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think they're collecting that first study that they're doing, but let's keep it within our own worlds. Yeah. Yeah. So
Thank
Dawn,
you.
back to your line item. This is one thing I didn't do on the project that we had out, because it was like a quick, all of a sudden, oh shoot, that one does, it's not going to make the June commission meeting. I got to push it to July, therefore I need to throw the requirements in there. I did not put it as a line item. I just put it as a mention in the bid form. But did you also update your measure and payment to include how that would get paid in your measure and payment section?
I will have to check with Callie on that.
Okay. I just all of a sudden, because I really like that idea, I just didn't. But regardless, since I don't have it in there, Brooke, I would, it would be the last pay application before retainage. So that would be part of the closeout and the last pay application for us, and we'd withhold it or we would pay it, add it to that. And so, yes, we would be figuring that out then.
Gotcha. That makes so much more sense. Thank you.
We also use the last pay estimate. If these penalties get too big, we won't be able to do that. We'll have to invoice, but the current plan is to stay with what we've been doing and deduct.
I have a question. I think it was Anna. You had mentioned that you go to the LNI website to check, but that's not always accurate because it's only based on the certified payroll that they've submitted so far. So do you have another method for tracking?
So we just use that as a point in time conversation during the project. At the end of the project, when they file their affidavits, that's when it's accurate because it's based on affidavit data, that same LNI portal. So we're just using the monthly as a conversation check-in. Hey, you don't have any apprentices yet. What's your plan?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, we're likewise, when our purchasing staff look at affidavits or intents as part of each progress payment, they check that as well. And then they're instructed to let the project manager know if they are not looking like they're going to meet their goal and to add that into the monthly or the weekly construction meetings. How many of you guys are going to start requiring an apprenticeship utilization plan at the beginning as a submittal, as a pre-work and or as a submittal within the first 30 days of the contract?
Yep, submittal for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, us too.
Okay, that's what we're doing now as well, and then that will help us because right now we do it like we were just mentioned, but we had no apprenticeship utilization plan to go against. So it was our professional judgment, which we don't always know what's going on in what project. And so this will help a little bit more to take that apprenticeship utilization plan and be able to work with the project managers to show them where we're at. So we actually have a spreadsheet where when they go in and check it, they actually type in the current apprenticeship utilization ratio and then we have a final, a column for final. So we can kind of see as we're working through the project and every project where we're at in that particular project. What other questions do folks have? So Dawn, do you want to chat a little bit then, if we don't have any other questions about where incentives are paid and what some of the discussions that we've been having about workforce development programs?
Sure. So I think it was back in February, we were at one of our trainings and the question had come up, who's doing what about incentives and disincentives? And the concern about paying contractors an incentive or a disincentive, going straight to profit versus really meeting the intent of the statute, which is to grow workforce and skills in public works. And so I wrote a plan and a recommendation for a workforce development fund and taking the percentages or the flat fees or whatever and paying into a workforce development fund versus paying directly to the contractors. And then the fund would need to be administered by someone, whether it's a state agency or, a fund administrator of some sort within regions, but that fund administrator would take and ensure that those funds go to the growth of apprenticeship programs, to improve facilities that house apprentices, to not house them, but employ them and train them. It would also go to programs like outreach to youth to go into workforce development programs, specifically for apprenticeships. It could also potentially go to wages. If an employer were to hire an apprentice graduate, then they could potentially submit for those funds. So that conversation started. I shared some of that here locally with Maya and Anna, and then I shared it with MRSC and WPPA. I shared it with our CEO. Our CEO has shared it with our commissioners. And at this point, the plan is to continue to socialize that. I actually have a meeting next Monday with a group in Oregon. Their purpose is to create a fund for workforce development and apprenticeships. And so it's funny how, we found this organization that is in alignment with the goals. And so potentially we have somebody who could administer it here in the, they call it the Portland metro area, but Portland, Vancouver. And I know that there's just continuing conversation about that. It will likely be, a slow moving target. My goal right now with the program is to ensure that there is an administrator for a fund like that, that gives us all an option to pay into a fund versus pay into a contractor profit. Because that contractor is not going to share it with the subs, and the subs are typically the ones that are bringing your apprentices to the project anyway. So if we want to see an impact in actual workforce development, then I think we have to do it a different way. So that's kind of where that is.
Yeah, the Port of Everett Commission is actually favors what Dawn is talking about. We just don't have anything right now up in the Snohomish County area. We had talked about potentially the port being that administrator for Snohomish County entities if other folks wanted to do that. We're not in a position at the moment to do that. So we're gonna, likewise with Dawn, we're gonna be slow rolling this. It's still a conversation. And if other folks want to join with that, I think the more support we have from other entities to say, hey, this doesn't make sense. Because I did do an analysis of the 5 or 6 program or projects under my voluntary program before I had to switch it. And it was hit and miss whether or not the general contractor had any apprentices, let alone the majority. And on some of them, yeah, they were at 80%, but it was the type of work. So it was obvious that the type of work dictated whether or not the general was going to have any apprentices or not. So I'm with Dawn, and I've had a lot of discussions about that. I like the idea because I think it then neutralizes, and it's not then profit for the general contractor. And I think there are projects when it does make sense, it isn't their profit, it does cover their costs. Others argue that it does cover the cost of them having to administer and really work, and the risk of having to sign a contract with apprenticeship requirements. So there are 2 sides to all of it, but there is some good discussion, I think, going on with what does workforce development really mean, and how can we help fund that? So thank you, Dawn.
Has anyone come up with language to add in to require the contractor to share the incentives that they receive?
No, it's been suggested here, but then you get into the enforcement of it, and then everybody kind of shies away from that because we don't want to be in the business of enforcing subcontracts.
Yeah.
Yes, we likewise had that discussion, Brooke, and came up with the exact same thing, because that was my initial thought was, oh, I'm just going to make them pass it down to the subs in a proportion that's, to whatever, however they participated. And then I realized I didn't really want to get into that enforcement either. One of the other things that I've talked about, and maybe we would do right now in lieu of a workforce development fund, if we aren't able to get that up and going, is we also added into our discussion with the commissioners that incentive could then be, because it does not specify in the RCW where that incentive or penalties are to be paid, that we could also do some pre-apprenticeship pipeline programs, such as for us here in Snohomish County, Snow Isle Skills Center, we have the Taro, the tribes have a pre-apprenticeship pipeline. We have the regional apprenticeship program. And so if we were not able to get something like a full-on workforce development fund, we could figure out some way to help with those pre-apprenticeship pipelines as well. So we're looking at multiple options. It's just not been a high priority, unfortunately. Getting this up and going was, and so we're currently paying that incentive to the contractor for the time being. What other questions, comments, concerns, suggestions do folks have? Well, all right. It sounds like we're probably pretty good. We still have 7 minutes left. We could answer questions, or we could all get 7 more minutes back on our calendar.
I think this was good. Good information. I'm anxious to see what everybody has, what is sent to you and shared. Because I feel like I'm like way behind on getting the stuff incorporated into our contract and our policies, and I'm starting to feel a little panicked.
You don't need to worry about it until you have a project over 2 million, then panic sets in, right?
Yeah, yeah. So thank you
Well-
for putting this together. Appreciate it.
Yes,
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate it as well, and I feel like I have a little more information to share with my team.
Good, good, good. Well, there'll be more ongoing discussions. I believe Josh from MRSE will be joining the WANIGP group at the Lunch and Learn on September. Gosh, Stacy, I know you don't have a mic right now, but do you remember? Is it the 4th or the 11th? Is it the 4th? So if you have additional questions, there's another opportunity to chat and get a little bit more. Just go to the WANIGP page. It's free for anyone. You do not have to be a member to join our Lunch and Learns, and you can register for that. And then if people want 6 months into this, we've talked, this is a long-term process because so many of us need to go through 4, 5, 6 contracts in order to really understand what's going on. And so we're happy to facilitate more conversations regarding this.